Drugs bad. I mean, drugs good when prescribed by a licensed healthcare professional. Drugs bad when slipped into your kale mango smoothie by a keeper of one of the 3 elven rings of power. This was supposed to be a Q&A video because I have an ear infection and allergies and I'm feeling lazy and I needed something to film this week. And when I sat down to record it, I started with Marcus's question about subplots and I ended up ranting about 9 Perfect Strangers at length. So this is just going to be a 9 Perfect Strangers rant about subplots video. I swear the Q&A video is coming. I will have that up and ready to go next week. But for now, let's get into this. Quick content warning that for the rest of this video, I'll be discussing topics covered in the show and the book, including drug use and suicide. Okay, Marcus asked, do you have any tips about planning out subplots? What do you do when you plan or write them, and how do you make sure they are properly integrated into the story so they don't feel like your characters are just grinding for XP and they don't grow too large and overshadow the main plot? So common advice, I think what you'll hear the most often, of course, is that your subplots should tie into your main plot in some way. If you're talking about your protagonist subplot, like their B story, then that's probably going to tie into their internal need, while the A story ties into the external want. And ultimately at the end, you want the A and the B stories to come together. And then as far as subplots with side characters go, obviously you want these side characters to be as well developed and just they're people of their own, agency just as much as the protagonist. But you also want their subplots to feel like they are tied into the protagonists without making it seem forced, which can be really tricky. I have definitely been in the same boat where a side character's subplot just like completely takes over the story. This happens to me when I'm in the middle of drafting Act 2 and I'm tired because writing a first draft is hard, and all of a sudden my protagonist is not interesting to me anymore, and this shiny new B story character is like, look at me, I'm so interesting, and I just kind of want to follow them instead. Happens a lot. So the murder mystery book that I am currently writing is multi-POV. While there is kind of a main protagonist who gets most of the page time, I do go into the heads and the POVs of some other characters. And I've been spending a lot of time developing their backstories and learning more about them, and they're very interesting, but I did start to wonder to myself, like, okay, how do these all tie together? Why these people? They're united and brought together into this story because of their connection to the victim in the beginning, but they're not otherwise connected to each other. What's the point of them being here? I just realized it had to be more than the victim wanted them there. It had to tie in to more than just the plot, which is essentially trying to solve what appears to be an impossible crime. I watched the Hulu adaptation of 9 Perfect Strangers while I was working on this, and I've read the book, and I was paying attention to this specifically, like subplots and how they work together, because this is also a story about a large cast of strangers brought together under unusual circumstances. So I was thinking while I was watching, how do each of their stories tie into the main plot? For the first several episodes, I thought it was pretty faithful to the book, but as it went on, some changes really started to bother me. And the ending... Oh, the ending. I get that adaptations are adaptations. They have to change the source material in some way, and I actually really enjoy that. I like seeing how writers take a story that worked in novel form and adapt it to make it work for film or television. What changes do they make? Why do they make those changes? And how did that make it better or not better? When I was younger, I would get really angry at adaptations because I wanted to see it on the screen exactly as it was in the book. It kind of took me a while to figure out that's not really possible. It took me even longer to realize that when a movie or a TV show, when they make changes to the plot, that's not necessarily what pisses me off. It's when they make changes to the plot that drastically change the themes of the story and the message that the story was trying to convey. That's when I get kind of stabby. Okay, so let's keep looking at 9 Perfect Strangers. What is the theme? I would say it's grief, loss, dealing with grief and loss, processing grief, things like that. That's really the common unifier among the 9 strangers. Frances has just essentially been catfished. She was a part of a romance scam. She lost a partner and a son who weren't even real to begin with, which is pretty wild. Also, her publisher has just rejected her recent book, so her career as a romance author is dying. She's grieving both on a personal and professional level. Tony has lost his career as an athlete to an injury, and then he lost his happy, good-natured personality. He kind of lost his sense of self due to his painkiller addiction. The Marconis have lost a son to suicide. Carmel lost her husband to a younger woman, and they're currently on vacation with her daughters, so really she feels like she's lost her entire family. Lars is on the verge of losing his boyfriend because they can't agree on whether to have a baby. Ben and Jessica are childhood sweethearts who won the lottery, but now their massive wealth is ruining not only their marriage, but really the only romantic relationship either of them has ever had. Also, Jessica has become obsessed with her appearance and being an influencer, and it really puts Ben off. Also, Ben is mourning the loss of his sister Lucy. She's not dead, but she is heavily addicted to drugs. It has completely taken over her life. It's consumed her and changed her personality, and she's pretty much estranged from the family. The show did not put this in at all. That was kind of the first red flag to me that this was not going to be what I wanted it to be. And then there's Masha. Perfect, totally in touch with her true self, overcame a near-death experience and is definitely not suppressing anything anymore. Lady of the Golden Wood, who is going to make these deeply hurt and struggling characters look into her mirror for therapy. Okay, now in the book, I would say that Masha is both the protagonist and the antagonist. I know it seems like Frances is the protagonist. She definitely gets the most page time. We spend most of the time in her point of view. But the plot, the A story, the main plot, it revolves around this mysterious protocol that Masha is implementing, something that she is going to do to try to help all of these people who are struggling with all of these different losses and grieving in different ways. She is going to use this mysterious protocol to cure them. It's going to be revolutionary. The protocol is drugs. LSD, acid, slipped into their smoothies without their consent. And the plot does revolve around this. The midpoint is when the guests all realize that they're being drugged and their various reactions to this revelation. And the climax is when the protocol kind of reaches its peak and Masha's inner demons are rising to the surface and things get batshit out of control. The book has a naturally built-in timeline because they are here for a 10-day retreat. So there's our structure. We have 10 days and we just hop from one point of view to the next as this protocol is implemented, and we see how it begins to affect them and the choices they make based on what's happening. The choices they make based off their reactions to the protocol, this is what drives all of their subplots forward. Frances and Tony's enemies to lovers arc, Carmel gradually realizing why she's trying to fix herself and why that's not what she really needs, Ben and Jessica gradually realizing that they still care about one another, but their unexpected wealth has changed them both irrevocably and their marriage isn't fixable, and that's okay. The way each of the Marconis deal with their own feelings of guilt over their actions in the days leading up to Zach's death and how they react when they learn one another's secrets, and Lars lowering his very high walls for once and asking himself if he truly doesn't want a baby or if maybe something else is going on that he needs to address. Again, I'm talking about the book. That's how their subplots work in the book. And you know what? For the first half of the season, that's more or less how it seems to be going in the show as well. Plot-wise, the only big changes that the show seems to make, one is that Masha is receiving death threats via text, and we don't know who is sending them. Also, there's a love triangle with two of her employees that is completely pointless. I kind of suspect this is just a case of American adaptation of a non-American work. Gotta add the love triangle and the threats of violence. Masha's backstory changed slightly. In the novel, she lost her baby in a tragic accident, suppressed the shit out of that, and became a powerful but very unhealthy executive, had a heart attack, and then found inner peace in Rivendell. Ultimately, the tragedy she suppressed surfaces in the climax of the book. In the show, at first the changes seem minor. She lost her daughter in a tragic accident, became a powerful executive, and got shot randomly and found her inner peace in Rivendell. I was okay with these changes. They didn't seem to be too big until we got into like the second half of the series, and it really started to bother me, and I realized it was because these changes to the plot were really drastically affecting the theme of the story. Not just changing it, but making it so that the show has literally the opposite message from the book. Okay, first of all, let's start with the midpoint, this plot point where all of the characters' subplots come and unify together because they have all just realized that they are being drugged. Tony was rightfully scared because, hello, he already has a painkiller addiction. Ben was furious because, hello, his sister is a drug addict. Napoleon was both terrified and furious because one of the reveals is that his wife, Heather, knew that their son Zach's asthma medication came with a potential side effect of suicidal ideation. And are we seeing a trend here? Drugs bad. I mean, drugs good when prescribed by a licensed healthcare professional. Drugs bad when slipped into your kale mango smoothie by a keeper of one of the 3 elven rings of power. Those are the 3 characters in the book who are the most vocally, adamantly against being drugs, and they do not change their stances. In the show, there's like a little bit of what the heck is going on. There's some anger from some of the characters, but ultimately, and within a day, they all get on board. Literally every single one of them happily and willfully drinks Masha's Kool-Aid. And here's where the show, in my opinion, really got off the rails. So the theme is grief and loss and how we process this. Forget the Lady of Lorien for a minute. Let's imagine these 9 strangers were in group therapy with a real, legitimate, licensed psychiatrist. What might this therapist say?
You're mourning the loss of what you thought your life was going to be. Let it go.
I think that's such an important part of the grieving process. It's not just about grieving the loss of the person or your career or whatever it is that you're mourning. It is about accepting the fact that your life is now on a new path. And while that might seem painful or even impossible, you can find joy down this path too. You're not just processing your feelings about whatever you lost, you're processing your feelings about this new path that your life is on. This new reality, reality being a key word. It's like the one thing that unifies these 9 strangers and their subplots. Okay, so let's compare and contrast. How do the subplots of all of these characters wrap up in the climax and the end of the book? Frances gets motivated to write in a new genre and saves her career, and she starts a romantic relationship with Tony. Tony gets off the painkillers, he adopts a dog, he repairs his relationship with his kids. Ben amicably parts ways with Jessica, gets a job, and when his sister Lucy dies of a drug overdose, he reconnects with Zoe Marconi over their shared pain of having lost siblings, and years later, they end up together. Jessica is still super into being an influencer, but she starts to use her platform and her wealth for charity work. The Marconis allow themselves to be angry with one another over each of their actions in the days leading up to Zach's death, and ultimately they forgive one another and learn to move on without him. Also, remember Napoleon's reaction to being drugged? His fears come true. In the book, 6 weeks later, he is struggling with depression and he goes to a real, actual therapist, and they begin a journey of real, actual healing together. Lars tells his boyfriend he's open to discussing the possibility of having a baby. Carmel gets to know her ex's young girlfriend and learns she can't have children and genuinely wants to be a good co-parent to her daughters. Carmel not only befriends her ex-husband's new wife, they become co-parents. She says in the book, Carmel experienced another burst of euphoria. She might have lost a husband, but she'd got herself a wife. An efficient, energetic young wife. What a bargain. What an upgrade. That's Carmel's journey. Such different subplots, but I think they all go together beautifully in the book because they all illustrate the same theme of, the healthy way to process grief and move forward. And then wait, what about the main plot? The protocol, the drugs, and Masha. In the book, Masha's failure to process her grief over the baby that she lost years and years ago, all those inner demons, they kind of rise and she has a breakdown. She ends up imprisoned. She goes to jail for running a retreat where she drugs people without their consent. Oh, and also locks them in a basement and uses a bunch of trickery to convince them that the building is on fire and they are literally about to burn to death because you can only appreciate life when you have experienced death or whatever. And then in the epilogue, she gets out of prison and it's rumored that she has begun her retreats again. She has not learned the lesson. There's a final scene in this book from her ex-husband's point of view. Have we heard anything about him? No. And I know that might seem random, but it's not. It has a point in this story. He is watching this news story about her and how she is, out of prison, and how there are rumors that these retreats are happening again. And he is with his daughter-in-law and his grandson, because here's the thing. When his and Masha's first child, their baby, tragically died in an accident, at the time, Masha was pregnant with their second child. And when I said Masha never processed what happens, I mean never processed a thing. Literally, we learned that the moment she had that baby, their second child in the hospital, she gave that baby to her ex-husband and said, "I am nothing as a wife and mother. Bye." And she left, and that was it. She cut off all ties, never saw him again, never really truly met her second child. She doesn't know she has a grandson. Her ex expresses in his internal narration, he expresses hope that one day she will truly heal and forgive herself for what happened. The point of this scene is to show us that if Masha herself had done what the others did and found a healthy way to process their grief, there was joy waiting for her in this new path that her life had taken. But she's just not there yet, and we don't know if she will ever get there, and that's what makes her story so tragic.
Let it go. Things don't always work out how you plan. That's not necessarily bad.
And that's what the show said too, right? Frances gets motivated to write in a new genre and saves her career and starts a relationship with Tony. Oh, okay, yeah. Cool so far. Tony gets off the painkillers, adopts a dog, repairs his relationship with his kids. Yes, awesome. The Marconis allow themselves to be angry with one another over each of their actions in the days leading up to Zach's death, and ultimately they forgive one another and learn to move on without him. Okay, this is good, except in the book, Frances and Tony and the Marconis managed to do this in spite of Masha. In the show, they manage this because of Masha. Because of her drugging them, because of her locking them in a room and convincing them they were about to die. Ben and Jessica take over Tranquillum House, meet the new king and queen of Lothlorien. Lars and his partner have a baby, and Lars writes a glowing review of Masha's methods, which again include locking people in a room and making them believe they're about to burn to death, and also drugging them. And oh, did I mention Lars knew that a previous client of Masha's literally died during the protocol? But yay, Masha, what a revolutionary. And Carmel, oh God. Oh, Carmel. Carmel experienced another burst of euphoria. She might have lost a husband, but she'd got herself a wife, an efficient, energetic young wife. What a bargain. What an upgrade. I just needed to remind you that is how book Carmel's story ends. And in the show, Carmel is revealed to be not only the person texting Masha threats, but also the person who shot her, because Masha also had an affair with Carmel's husband, and poor Carmel truly needs professional, actual help more than any other character here aside from Masha herself. And what happens? Masha locks her in a sensory deprivation tank against her will, and oh yeah, convinces her she's about to be burned alive, a standard in any therapist's toolbox. And not only does it work, not only does it, air quote, fix Carmel, she becomes a therapist too. What an upgrade. Okay, so if you watch the show at this point, you're probably thinking, no, Michelle, you didn't get the ending. You missed it. You're interpreting it wrong. I didn't. I caught it. I know what you're talking about, and I actually like this version much better, so let's roll with it for a second. After the climax, Frances and Tony go to a restaurant, and Frances gets inspired, and she starts writing. And that's when we see all of these futures, how all of these things turn out for all of these characters, all of these happily ever afters, and then we cut back to Frances writing. And then we see her novel, 9 Perfect Strangers, with her name as the author, on the dashboard as Masha drives. So the implication here is that this is not really how things ended for these characters. This is the ending that Frances, the romance author who loves happily ever afters, gave them. I actually love that interpretation. It's unsettling and ambiguous because we don't know how things really went for any of them in a way that I really like. But two problems. One, before Frances starts writing this story, when the characters find Masha tripping acid and finally hallucinating her daughter, which was her true goal all along, not to help them, but just to be reconnected with her daughter, and the cops arrive. Remember now, these are people who were all literally locked in a room and made to believe the building was on fire and they were all about to burn to death. They cover for her. They don't tell the cops what she did. They weirdly seem to respect her. They are cured because of what she did to them.
You could go to jail for this.
I could, but I'm not going to because you're going to be thanking me.
And then that's exactly what happened. And in the book, when they get out of that room and Masha is in full meltdown mode, they argue with her, they scream at her, and the climax is Masha literally trying to murder Heather Marconi with a letter opener. These characters do not make peace with Masha because Masha is so drunk on her own Kool-Aid that she is just on another planet at this point. And the second problem with this interpretation, the director himself said it was all real. In the director's opinion, the epilogue did really happen, but that doesn't mean he's right. Levine told Newsweek, "I think it is all real, but I did sort of want to leave it up in the air." So yeah, the Frances wrote the happily ever after theory is great and my preferred interpretation, but it doesn't really fit with the scenes preceding it, and also the director said that's not what happened. So the theme and lesson of the novel is that you need to find a way to process your grief in a healthy way where you feel the pain but recognize that there is joy waiting for you still on this new path that your life is on, even if that life is not the one you envisioned for yourself. And the theme of the show is that all you have to do is suppress your grief by tripping acid and hallucinating that you're living in your past. That is why it's so upsetting to me that they took out those key reactions at the midpoint from Tony, Ben, and Napoleon when they find out they're being drugged. All three of those characters had very good reason to be extremely afraid of the consequences. And in Napoleon's case, he suffered the consequences he feared. I need to read Napoleon's final scene from this book because just compare this to the show. Since returning from Tranquillum House, he'd been surviving, teaching, cooking, talking to his wife, running his support group. It was amazing to him that everyone treated him as if he were just the same. It reminded him of the blocked ears feeling after a flight, except all his senses, not just his hearing, felt muted. His voice seemed to echo in his ears. The sky was leached of color. He did nothing he wasn't obliged to do because the effort of existence exhausted him. He slept whenever he could. Getting up each morning was like moving his limbs through thick mud. And here's his appointment with his therapist. He told her about Zach. He told her about the drugs he was given at Tranquillum House and how ever since then he'd been struggling with what he believed to be depression. He told her that his GP had offered him antidepressants and he probably did need antidepressants, but he knew sometimes it was hard to get the dosage right. It wasn't an exact science. He understood and appreciated this. He had done the research. He knew all the brand names, all the side effects. He'd put together his own spreadsheet if she was interested in taking a look, and he knew that sometimes during that initial period, patients didn't get better, they got worse. They suffered suicidal thoughts, and he knew this because he knew people who had lost family members in that way, and he also knew that he overreacted to drugs. He knew this about himself, and maybe his son had had that same sensitivity. He didn't know, and he was sure that those people at that health resort meant well, and maybe this depression was going to happen anyway, but he felt that he was possibly the one person in that room who should never, ever have been given that smoothie. And then, limp with exhaustion, he said, "Allison, I am terrified that I will..." She didn't ask him to finish the sentence. She reached across the coffee table and put her hand on his arm. "We're a team now, Napoleon. You and me, we're a team, and we're going to work out a strategy, and we are going to beat this, okay?" She looked at him with all the passion and intensity of his old football coach. "We're going to beat it. We're going to win." I know this video is supposed to be about subplots. Okay, so I want to make sure I stay focused on that. And the subplots that the show added or changed, while I didn't necessarily agree with them, there probably was a way to make it work. There was probably a way to make it work that Carmel was the person who shot Masha. I mean, maybe even the love triangle could have worked if we got any sort of insight into Yao and Delilah, the two employees that Masha is fooling around with, and known what their actual inner conflicts were, but those characters were just woefully underdeveloped. But the way the Carmel and Masha thing played out, like, these women in the show were both so desperately in need of real, legitimate help from a qualified professional. But what the show tells us is that through the magic of LSD and being imprisoned, they're magically cured? What? Look, I am all for like dark and twisted endings. Love a dark and twisted ending. But the message of a good, dark and twisted ending should still resonate some sort of truth. And the truth that we're being told through this show is that you never have to process your grief. You don't need professional help. You need LSD. You need to be convinced briefly that you're about to burn to death, and then you're gonna be fine. Like, those things aren't going to traumatize you even further. So I guess it was just a really long-winded way of saying, if you're working on subplots in your novel, what you want to do is, yeah, they should tie into the plot, but I think the place to start is to ask yourself from the beginning, what is the theme of my novel? What am I trying to say with the plot? And now how do all of my subplots relate to this theme? This is your opportunity to examine the theme of your novel from all these different angles and all of these different perspectives. And it should do nothing but deepen and enhance your story and your story's theme. Marcus, I hope that was helpful in answering your question. Thank you guys for listening to me rant about this. Obviously, I have a lot of feelings on this adaptation. Also, I've actually considered in the past doing a series of videos where I analyze an adaptation of a book, whether it's a movie or a show, but specifically through the lens of like a writing craft topic, such as subplots and themes. So if that's something you guys would be interested in, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I will get on that Q&A video, unless every single question leads to me ranting for 20 minutes. We shall see. Also, let me know what you thought of 9 Perfect Strangers, the book and or the show. If you watched the show but you did not read the book, I'm very interested to know what you think. Did this make sense to you? Did it resonate with you? What did you think of the ending, not knowing what the ending of the book is? Very curious. Yeah, and that's gonna be it for this video. I will see you guys next week with another one. Bye.